Hi, folks. Eric Mucky with Lost&Found. Welcome to this week's episode of Voices of Resilience, the place where we talk about the ways in which resilience plays out for ourselves, for others, and for our communities. We're happy you can join us this week. I'm really excited to get you introduced here today to our guest, Andrew DeVaney. But really just want to kind of quick start off with some intros. So for those of you who are familiar with Voices of Resilience and the way that we've approached our show weekly, you'll see a little bit of a different flair and a different flavor. You'll see maybe a few more questions, a little bit more focused on policy realms and sort of the systems and work that we do each day to make resilience and make mental health and suicide prevention a part of our lives. But really where we'll focus our attention here, especially this month, and we'll talk a little bit more about our guests at the end of the show, is really getting into a state of understanding how does policy in particular play out for us? How does all of the things that we do or say to take on resilience as part of our daily lives in any aspect of work that we do is really what we'll be focusing on here in Voices of Resilience. And we're excited to take you along for this journey of shift and change and really kind of get to the stories that make us resilient. So that's what Voices of Resilience is about. What I really want to kind of explain or share before we get too far down the road is just a quick shout out to the folks who make this show possible each week. And those are our partners from the Astrup Family Foundation in Rochester, Minnesota, and American Bank and Trust here in South Dakota, with locations all over the state, but based in Huron. And so when you think about sort of the work that we do, know that there are partners behind this, know that there are folks that are involved and engaged with us day to day. And so really appreciate the sponsorship and support of our partners from the Astrup Family Foundation and American Bank and Trust who make this work possible. Let's get to it. Let's meet our guest today. So I'm going to introduce our guest, Andrew DeVaney. Andrew comes to us from South Dakota. He currently is based in Colorado, but Andrew is the founder and CEO of As One Ministries. This was an idea and an organization that he came together with or thought of while he was a student in South Dakota at Dakota Wesleyan University, where he earned his bachelor's degree in religious studies. His work with As One Ministries and spiritual, relational, and physical poverty one community at a time. Naturally, a lot of impact to talk about there. Andrew has a passion for understanding the depth and complexity of poverty and how God's mission can be truly transformational in our lives, communities, and societal structures around the world. I mentioned that he currently lives in Colorado. He just received his master's in divinity from Denver Seminary in Littleton, Colorado. And so without further ado, we're going to jump right into it. I'll get Andrew on here. Hey, Andrew, how are you?
Yeah, thanks for the nice introduction.
Glad you could make it.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Tell me a little bit about how you got into this work. How did you get into the work of As One?
Yeah, so I'll give you the synthesized version, but I had a professor at Dakota Wesleyan named Alicia Vincent, who kept bothering me while I was in the cafeteria that I would join her on a trip to East Africa. And I had done some missions type experience, been on some international trips, probably that you would imagine, like service trips. You go and you build a house, you go and you paint classrooms. It was kind of what you would think of when you think of a traditional missions trip. And so she was offering a trip at Dakota Wesleyan, kept inviting me to come. I think in a tongue-in-cheek way, I told her I would maybe be interested. I had a little bit of a predicament. I was an athlete at the time, playing football at Wesleyan. But I definitely was wanting something deeper. And so I said to her, I'd be interested, but I don't necessarily want to help people. I want deeper, more immersive, something that's going to challenge me, something that's going to give me the opportunity to somehow better understand the complexities of what people face around the world. I wanted to see it, smell it, feel it, experience it to the point that I was uncomfortable with it. And so, I got what I asked for, and she set me up with an opportunity. That first summer was over in Rwanda to spend the summer over there, and subsequently, went back the very next summer with some of my best friends from college. But Did your experience of living in a mud house and you roll over in bed and you accidentally bump yourself and some dirt falls on you while you're trying to sleep, and learning to, like my toilet was a hole in the ground, a pit latrine, shower with a bucket of water every day, learn to fetch water with families in the mornings and kids in the afternoons, and sort of just had the goal as a young 20-something that we wanted to build friendships. We wanted to build relationships. Weren't as interested in serving and volunteering, but wanted to get close to the problem. And I think the faith motivator for me was I feel like so much of my Christian experience early on was about God evacuating. It was like about going to heaven. It was about going somewhere else. Very, very little to do with our life and our experience here on earth. And I think for me, I wanted to know, where was God and what was he doing in the midst of the world's greatest problems? So that was the point of entry. That was kind of the point of invitation and curiosity for me. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you managed to survive the pit latrine and all of the roughing it that you managed to get through. Tell me a little bit about, so in our context today for the folks listening, the theme that we really want to capture today is sort of what resilience looks like in that space of founding and starting a nonprofit and creating impact in that space. When you think of the word resilience for you, what comes to mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. At the end of the day, probably the most simple way I'd think about it is to keep going. But one of the great invitations, I think, in resilience is that you view everything as an opportunity. This last year, COVID, unbelievably tough year. I probably faced every fear that I could think and imagine within my body and within my bones as to what was going to happen, and was this dream that I started, was it going to continue on, and how are we going to make payroll and pay salaries when everything was shut down? And I very easily could extrapolate it to the nth degree as to what could happen. And I think that one of the things that I've tried to function with as much as possible is any challenge, and there's been a lot of challenges along the way, is to look at it as an opportunity to change and to innovate and to grow. And even when I'm like beating myself up as hard as I can for the mistakes that I've made, that even in that moment is very pregnant with an opportunity to grow. And so I think that mindset and having a community of people encouraging me around me, that you really view any challenges like, hey, so what's the opportunity embedded within this? Where's the opportunity to learn, to grow, to change? Which it just isn't natural. I think once you get to a point where you've maybe figured it out to some degree, or you're having some success, change is really hard. You want to just keep that going. And so, yeah, I think that's been a big lesson for me.
I love that. I'm really curious too, when you think about not just getting yourself started with your work, but also thinking about sort of the next stage, what is it that you see, or how do you see resilience, I guess, play out in the work that you do day to day?
Good. It's a good question. It's in a lot of different ways, so I think I'm trying to think of a couple different examples. Probably the most pertinent is like what's going on right now. One of the things that's been hard about COVID is so much of what I did do got shifted and got changed. And I would say very openly and honestly that I am somebody who rides emotional highs and has emotional lows. And so I can get highly discouraged when I don't think things are going well. And so I think practically, the way that I've seen that play out is, like, for instance, we build schools in Uganda, and schools have been closed for an entire year. And so that's like one of our major revenue forms in the country. That's, the thing that I'm like inviting everybody to participate in through their generosity. And I have no statistics to prove how good it's truly going. But to continue to like believe in the cause of it and the importance of it and the importance of students' futures and the need to have to change away from a model where we were doing something for a while to maybe we're going to have to do something in the interim, to what's it going to look like in the future, and what ways are we going to continue to have to change and innovate? What are ways that we're going to, can we get creative to try to pull in local forms of revenue, to how are we going to change our fundraising strategies in the midst of, less travel and less contact world? How do you deal with communication across the globe when they're in the midst of a political situation that shut down their social media and their internet, and for like 8 months they shut down travel, couldn't get over there? I mean, there's just been a lot of unique challenges, and I feel like one of the things that we've had to continue to do is to just not give up and look for every option possible, and view it as, this is just going to continue to make us better and stronger, and trust is going to be the bedrock of what we can build on. And so, learning to fight through those challenges together, I think, have been real practical ways that I've had to think about how do we grow.
That's fantastic. I have to say, when you're talking about sort of the measure of impact and really trying to get people the story, understanding, how do you kind of hold yourself together in that process? I'm curious.
Okay, explain just a little bit.
So when you're talking about like, hey, like we're really trying to say like, how do we explain the work that we're doing, talk about the impact, and talk about all the challenges that folks who are on the ground are experiencing, and in the midst of that, you're almost in sort of this, the way you're describing, kind of like a middleman position of like you're trying to kind of get people held together. How do you navigate that? How did you?
I think one of my biggest challenges as a leader is the world of the future is sometimes more clear, and I believe in it, more than the world that I'm in right now, and so I think probably the biggest emotional tension I face inside myself is what I believe we can become, and what I truly believe we can create, and where things are at. And at sometimes there is a large chasm between that. And it takes a lot of confidence. I'd say sometimes I have to even like make myself believe that it's true. And so, but I think my faith motivates that a ton, that I really do believe as that we're participating in something much, much bigger than me and what I could ever create on my own, that I've seen the ways in which, God has showed up in a variety of ways. It's been really incredible. And then, I heard something recently about courage, and that courage isn't something internal, but it's actually something external. I think it was Simon Sinek was talking about it. And that courage being external is like that person that says like, hey, I think you can do it. I believe in you. I love your, I have the privilege of, just once in a while, just getting that one individual or that group of people that say, I believe in that world too. I believe that that's possible too. And so in tremendous ways, I think like the gift of other people and the gift of community and relationships has helped motivate me and keep it going, keep me going. Yeah.
I love that. That's really powerful and a good message for any of us who are trying to navigate sort of that. How do we create impact? And especially when we're trying to sort of take care of ourselves in that process, really being able to think about sort of this back and forth. I'm forever amazed by that ability. And I see that in what you're talking about. Like you clearly sort of exude that sort of ability to live in duality, as Brene Brown talks about, like that whole, like, hey, like we know that things could be better, but we have a lot of faith that things can be practically and reasonably better. So appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, I think it's for anybody trying to create something that doesn't exist, make something new in the world. I just think it's a hard position to live in. Yeah. And I think as I've been in it, the dream just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and the vision gets bigger and bigger. And I actually think that that's entirely hopeful and motivating for other people too, though.
I love that. Well, and tell me this then. So what is the dream? What is really the dream that you're chasing in this case? And I know I keep firing questions at you, so please tell me.
So kind of our dream, and we just have been talking about this over the last 6 months or so, but a dream that we have right now is that in 10 years, so by 2030, we could have this model in Uganda replicated into 10 different communities. A model where in one community we build a school that serves up to 600 students. We have a medical center and a health center, outpatient facility. We have a commercial farm that we use as a training center, and we use to grow our crops for our schools, and 2 to 3 small businesses, enterprises between 8 to 20 employees in one community in Uganda. So in a rural community where there is very little infrastructure and economic development, that we would be able to replicate that entire model into 10 different communities, which would give us, the opportunity to employ over 1,000 people in the country, making us probably one of the largest employers, and if not the largest employer in every community we serve in, serving around 6,000 students annually, seeing 30,000 people a year through our health clinics. It's just remarkable numbers. And then on average, 2,000 people in a community that were training and improved technical or vocational type skills. And the goal is that everything that we do to operate it would come from the local economy. So like all of that is being created through locally generated jobs. We're putting in the investment capital here from the U.S. And then at the end of the day, like that those institutions would have the power to actually change people's lives, truly change them, their character, their hope, their dreams for the world, the kind of person they want to be at the end of the day, that those institutions would serve in a way where we're not just changing economies, but we're also changing people to view the world differently, to not be divisive, but to be hopeful, to listen better, to be leaders, and to be change makers. I think like that's ultimately the dream. So kind of a big goal for the next 10 years, but we'll see what happens.
Hey, big goals change the world, right? That's the whole idea. I love that. I want to dig in a little bit further into that replicable nature of the model, and also talking about the mental health side of this a little bit too, and kind of figure out where that comes together. But just want a quick shout out again to our sponsors. The ticker didn't seem to want to work with us the first time, so we're going to do it again. But no, really just quickly want to highlight specifically the Astra Family Foundation, a little bit of the background for those of you who may not be familiar with their work. The Astra Family Foundation is based in Rochester, Minnesota. It's a family foundation founded by a prominent member of the Austin, Minnesota community. Their focus: family values, faith, education, healthcare, strong communities. A $10,000 donation from the Astra Family Foundation helps sponsor this and drive this work. So just want to give a quick shout out to our folks in Rochester. I don't know if any of the Astraps are currently watching at this moment, but please know our thanks and our appreciation for what you do for us. If you want to learn more about them, for anybody watching, just go to the astrafamilyfoundation.org. So I know our sponsors are also anxiously waiting to hear more about Andrew's work and the replicability of Aswan Ministries. So tell me a little bit about, like, when you think of replicability, I feel like this is probably the number one challenge that a lot of nonprofits are facing is, how do we not just create impact, but continuously sustain that? Yeah. What does that look like for you and the work that you do?
Yeah, I think that we're in an interesting phase of it right now, early on, trying to still figure out different financial models that are going to work for us. So, I think I'm in this phase right now for the last year and a half or so, where we're really trying to dial in and figure out how to financially we can do it. But at the end of the day, what's going to, set, I think, our work apart from, different organizations that are functioning at large scale and large sizes is we really want to be able to infuse specific values that create leaders who, outside of even what we're able to create, are able to, go out and start their own things, go out and be the kinds of people that the world needs, and to be the kind of people that we hope to be through as one. So, I think that trying to figure out in the long term, as we build up our own internal infrastructure, how are we able to scale and control the quality in which our organization is able to produce? That's going to be probably one of our great challenges that we continue to face, that we're even trying to incubate and still figure out in the work that we're doing. And I think, getting back to the conversation of resilience, like that's, to me, that's the invitation of leadership, though, is that, like, it's always, you never reach it. Simon Sinek does say that it's an infinite game, not a finite game. You're not just trying to be better than the person next to you, because the reality is, in an infinite game, somebody's always better and somebody's always worse. And at one point in time, you might be better. And at one point in time, they're going to be better than you. And so our competition right now is really just ourselves. And how do we continue to look to grow and be better in the small things and in the big things every single day?
I really appreciate that. Thanks for walking us through that, and even thinking about the conversation, talking about resilience. You made a comment that really I found to be really poignant. So we're talking about the roots of what your work is, which in short terms, you can tell me if this is off, sort of almost like an economic development kind of approach. But you talk about taking care of people and getting people a chance to see the world differently. And I'm really intrigued, like, tell me what your thoughts are on that, and sort of how that comes to play out, especially when we're talking about things like mental health.
Yeah. So, I mean, my fundamental belief about poverty is that poverty is not a material problem at the end of the day. Like, it doesn't matter if you're living in a country of abundance or excess, or you're living in a country where material resources are more scarce. Both of them exude poverty in different dimensions. And that often we just reduce poverty to, what we picture probably when we've seen UNICEF commercials, or what we picture when we've seen somebody who's experiencing homelessness living on the streets. And we just think if we give them something, if we give them money, if we give them a shirt, if we give them a hat, whatever it is, that's going to fix their problem. And the reality is, it doesn't matter how much you have. We're all experiencing different dimensions of poverty in different ways. And so I think for us, the undergirding belief is that what we're doing from an economic side, it is addressing a significant form of poverty in Uganda, but it goes so much, all of it goes so much deeper. And so, I view poverty as the result of broken relationships. And as a Christian, view fundamentally that broken relationship, there being something off about our relationship with God, which then therefore leads to something that's off or broken within ourselves, which relates to the person across from us, which relates to the other, which then creates systems of broken relationships. And so I believe inherently and fundamentally, poverty is an issue of relationship. And so, one of our main values as an organization has always been relationship. And so we try to live that out in ways in which, we say in our communities, our employees live where they work. We want them to be in and with and experiencing the challenges that people are experiencing themselves. We, have always said that we believe in people over projects, that the person and their individual needs are going to be more important or are the deep value of the institution itself. And so I think that, having a deeper understanding of the problem that you're trying to fix, the problem that you're trying to, the context that you're trying to work within, plays a huge part of that. And so, I think, when you get into the work, you begin to see that the physical aspects are a part of it, but like there's also harbored bitterness towards a neighbor, which is a relational dimension. There's sadness or depression or a sense of hopelessness, which is an emotional or a mental health aspect of it. There is, physical sicknesses that people are facing from a variety of different things. So I just think that, the problem is so much bigger than one thing fixing it. And so we try to, take that really seriously, that poverty is, a very multifaceted problem.
That's that holistic approach is something I think anybody from the Lost and Found team who's listening right now would be all of like, hey, we're on the same page. But tell me about this. Walk me through some of these facets of poverty. I'm curious to hear more about, sort of, for folks listening, what that looks like.
Yeah, I mean, so like this was my experience going over to Uganda, and this is kind of the wake up call for me as I began to see in a materially scarce or an economically scarce, I was experiencing people who lived in the present and with more joy than I had ever seen before. And that started to like make me ask some questions, and we'd stay up, we'd eat meals together every single day. And then, we'd stay up late into the night singing, and then we'd pray, and then we'd talk and have deep conversation. And I was always around people all the time. It was like one of the most, Uganda would be one of the most relationally welcoming. They'll inconvenience themselves for their visitors. One of the most relationally rich countries I've ever been to. And so, I remember reading a book called Becoming Whole, and what they say in there that the opposite of poverty is not the American dream. And one of the statistics that they point out is that while America has continually increased its GDP, it's become more people have become economically well off. Depression and anxiety are on the rise every single year. And it almost, creates this graph that's a complete X. As we increase, anxiety and depression continue to increase. And I would say probably a part of that has to do with increased study in the area. But I also think there's just an equation that like money doesn't fix everything. And better, economic situations doesn't just fix everything. I think it's an important aspect of flourishing, and it's an important aspect of wholeness. But I think that, my fundamental approach to the work that we do is to try to always keep a posture of learning. That you can't go into an environment and think that you can fix something without thinking that you can learn something as well. That we maybe all have advice that we can give. We maybe all have good insight, or we come from a background and experience that could be beneficial, but it's not like the most beneficial. There are definitely things that we can learn in the process. So we really view, we're outsiders going in, we're outsiders investing in a different country. And so it would be completely foolish to think that we have the idea of what the good life is. We have the idea of what a whole or flourishing world looks like when we don't even live it and experience it ourselves. I struggle with stress, anxiety. I worry probably more than I ever should. I spend way too much on this thing right here and on the computer that we're talking about, and I disengage relationally. And being an American, I try to, we naturally have a position of where we utilize people for different types of gain. And I've just never experienced a culture like Uganda where there is just a genuine sense of love and hospitality and deep relationships. So I don't know if I exactly answered your question, but I just think it's like, there are some parts that are marred. There are some parts that are broken, but they also are vibrant and rich in many, many ways. And so I would hate to take away from that aspect of their life and their culture. So it's something we're trying to be very, very keen to pay attention to.
That's really, like, you might not have you answered the question fully, but like I literally was just going to ask you, as you're thinking about how this plays out in America, like, what does that look like, and what sort of your take would be on, how do we do better?
Yeah.
Your thoughts?
I come from the position that I just think like it doesn't matter. All these different cultures and backgrounds, different. It doesn't matter even me to you as much as something that has a chasm where like me and an individual in Uganda. There's something unique that each individual, each culture reflects in what I would believe is God's image that one culture and that one person aren't going to reflect. And so, in our culture, we're just way quick to find the common enemy or find the most divisive topic. And I actually think there's an abundance of opportunity to learn and listen. And so I would say, just from my experience from Uganda, I've learned, not that I'm always great at implementing it, but I've just learned so much from them about what makes for a rich life, what makes for, and part of it has to do with like learning to live more simply. I think part of what leads to sometimes greater senses of being present and living in the moment and living in a posture of gratefulness is, the simplicity of life at times. Our lives have become so complex where there's just so much to worry about. I think within that context, I've learned so much in my, for my own practical life. Not all of us are giving ourselves maybe towards work where we're forming some type of movement that could have societal and structural change in the United States. But I do think, learning to listen to how other societies, cultures, people live, I think there's a lot of value in listening and taking a posture of learning.
That's a really good lesson, I think, for all of us to sort of use your two ears before you use your singular mouth. Although, of course, we're maybe going the opposite direction here, you and I. But I love where you're taking this. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I know one thing I want to ask you with in sort of that same vein, like all that perspective considered, you have such a rich view of why we need to be more relational or what it means to be much more willing to learn other than give. And there's your line about we all have a perspective to share. We all have some expertise we might think we have to share. We probably all do in some capacity, but sort of like how do you translate that into a bigger picture for you with all of these things considered and your experience in Uganda, the United States, and Lord knows wherever as one ministries may go and time goes on. What does it mean to you to create impact?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one thing I struggle with too much as a leader is I probably focus way too much on the outcomes. When I really believe at the end of the day that outcomes are a result, and that as we focus on the process and we pay attention to the small things. I don't mean this to sound cliche, but I really appreciate Mother Teresa when she says, it's not about doing great things. It's about doing small things with great love. And I really do think that it's actually in the process of the small things that make up our day-to-day life that create the results, that create the outcomes that we want. And as a leader, I fail at that probably way, way too much, where I want specific outcomes and I want to see that we've met A, B, and C. But something I try to remind myself of almost every single morning, because we start our mornings pretty early with our meetings in Uganda due to the time difference, is I really try to take some deep breaths and pray and do some type of meditation that helps me to realize it's in all of the small things that the outcomes are made from. And yeah, so I think when I think about making an impact, I probably try to err on the side of asking the question of who are we becoming, and what kind of person are we? What kind of person am I, and who am I becoming? And how do I expect? My personal struggle is I feel like I can get angry, upset, impatient, things like that. And it's like I have to be a part of the change too. Like I'm not exempt. And so there's just so little I can control. I can cast a big vision. I can talk about a big picture. We can try to, raise the money, set up the right structures, hire the right people. But I think one thing that I try to process a lot is at the end of the day, who am I becoming in this whole process? And then maybe the rest of it is going to be a fruit or a result of a different posture. Yeah.
I love that. I'm thinking of for myself, even here in that process. I mean, just speaking ED to ED, like that's something that I think it's easy to forget in all the reporting and the impact reports and the funding, the fundraising and all the things that make up our day to day.
Yeah, we had a shirt that we made a while ago that I still see people wear on occasion. It says transformation starts with me. And I just think we live in a world where we always think it's out there. We always think, if somebody would do this, or if we get a new administration, or if this group would go away, then the world would be a better place. And I just think that, just from my vantage point, way too seldom do we ever think about how we actually could implement that ourselves, how we could, subject ourselves to that vision of change that we so want to see in the world. I think that's where the true hard work is done.
Really living into that sort of be the change you wish to see in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we could all learn from that, to say the least, at this point in time and sort of the juncture that we're in. I do want to do sort of a quick transition, and then we're going to throw some lighter questions your way.
Yeah, sounds good.
A little bit more focused on breakfast and other things here, but kind of quick shout out again for the folks listening. friendly reminder, the work that happens here is all funded by support from our sponsors in the Ace for Family Foundation in Rochester, Minnesota, but also our friends at American Bank and Trust in Sioux Falls. One of the first partners for Lost and Found to really take sort of the next leap and impact in Sioux Falls, especially with college campus work that we do. So training peer advocates, helping campus administrators make good decisions about mental health programs, policies, and personnel decisions based on available data. American Bank and Trust was really one of the first organizations to step in and say, this is what's needed in our community. So for those of you watching from American Bank and Trust, thank you so much. For those of you looking to learn more about American Bank and Trust and what they offer, simply go to abt.bank. I have to say, I love the new age of your website no longer has to be a .com or .org address. So
Yeah.
nice. But anybody who wants to learn more about American Bank and Trust, go to abt.bank and you can learn more about what they offer. So pulling back again. So I have one more question for you about your work, but I want to kind of throw some rapid fire your way. Let's
okay.
jump in. So
Yeah.
what's the best compliment you've ever received?
Oh my goodness. I don't know if I saw this one ahead of time when I was reading. As of recent, it was when I was getting my haircut, and the barber told me that he didn't think that I was going to go bald. That was probably the best compliment I've heard as of recent.
Better than maybe even your really rich impact and your really rich focus on impact. I'm not going to go bald tomorrow.
Yeah, I was really excited when he said that, but the jury's still out on that one. They'll just
Well, being a man of international, we'll say international man of mystery, but just international impact is maybe a better way to put this. Where do you get your news?
That's a good question. I actually source a variety of different places because I want to hear. Hopefully, there's not too much judgment in this, but I usually check NPR. I look at Market Watch, and then there's a company out of Sioux Falls, Market Beat. I look at that one, and the New York Times, and then I'll check Fox News as well because I want to try to see if I can capture the whole picture. And the USA Today I read a little bit as well.
Yeah, it's a pretty rich amount. I have a feeling Matt Paulson, if he's watching this somewhere, he's probably very happy that you said Market Beat.
Yeah. Well, I think it's cool. Local company.
I love that. Good mix. Favorite breakfast food?
Breakfast burritos for sure.
What's in your breakfast burrito?
There's a little place down the road from me that has like a carnitas and what do they put in it? The green. In Colorado, it seems like green chili is a big thing, and so it's like a carnitas with green chili, and it's flavorful. I like it these days.
I say might have to see if we can recreate it up here in Minnesota. Maybe not as accessible as we would like. But.
Yeah, but I probably don't eat breakfast enough. I should eat it more.
You and me both. We're good. Maybe a good transition to drink of choice. What are you usually in your hand?
Yeah, definitely depends on the time of day, but probably my drink of choice is a LaCroix. I'm kind of into the bubbly water thing, where it's definitely taken over my regular water drinking. But yeah, I like LaCroix a lot.
What's a flavor?
I like that key lime flavor. I think it tastes like Skittles.
I don't know if I've heard that one, but I might have to try key lime now just to okay. See
yeah, good. You'll know what I'm talking about when you try it.
What's your favorite board game?
Yeah. So I like Monopoly a lot. I've also been playing a fair amount of, oh my goodness, Sequence with my wife. That's kind of our go-to these days.
I say COVID board games, you're confined. You have to, play Sequence to get out of the room kind of thing.
Yeah, I've learned quite a few new board games this last year, but I haven't been too consistent in many of them.
Last one for you. So what's the best thing you learned this week?
Yeah, I'm reading an interesting book right now by a guy named Makoto Fujimura, and it's he's an artist, and the book is called Art and Faith. And I have a mentor that we're always kind of reading a different book, but in the book he's talking about a theology of making. And way too often in society, probably in Western society, our biggest question is something along the lines of like, what is our purpose? And one of the questions we're all trying to seek after is being purposeful. And one of the things that he proposes in the book is that we just have this utilitarian view of ourselves, that if we can't help accomplish something, then we really aren't valuable. We really aren't worthwhile. And that kind of the starting place in the Christian paradigm, the Judeo-Christian paradigm, is that the value comes in being this reflector of God's image. And as being reflectors of God's image in the world, if God is a maker and he's a creator, part of what it means to be made in God's image is that we make and that we create, and we join God in bringing about newness in the world. And I just think all too often my value and my identity gets wrapped up in my usefulness, my productivity. And I think that's just a false view of what it means to be human, that making and creating and doing new things is actually the result of the value that's already within us. And so that's been a posture I've been trying to live out of this week, at least.
A lot more creating, a lot more sort of building and focusing on sort of those things we can almost tangibly build, so to speak. Is that?
Yeah. And just that we do it out of a different internal disposition. Not that when we make and create, the result of that is what makes us valuable. It's that we're already valuable, so we're invited to be co-creators and co-laborers, and we're invited to make a new and better world together. That's the invitation. And so, versus finding all of your identity wrapped up in what you make and what people think of it. That the inherent act of making things in and of itself is, just part of the fun, part of the invitation.
I love that. So thinking in that vein, I got two more questions for you, then we'll let you off the hook. What is it when you think of sort of takeaways for somebody listening today? If you had to give a piece of advice to somebody who is making, who is building, who is taking on an initiative, whether it's building a nonprofit or, simply getting out of bed and saying, I'm going to make a creative breakfast today. What advice would you give?
Probably my first one would be where you're at and what you have. Like that's all that we're given. Like this moment that we're in right now, it's all that we're guaranteed, and it's all that we're given. And I think for me, so much of my journey of entrepreneurship or making or building or creating is focused on the future. And often when I'm focused on the future, it produces worry, it produces anxiety, it produces concern, it produces, there's a good side to it, but sometimes there's a real ugly and dark side to it. And I think to live with a posture of gratefulness for what you have. Like, I just think it results in such a greater sense of joy in life, such a greater sense of peace, that to be grateful for everything that you have in the moment, because it is really all a gift, I think is probably my first piece of advice. My second one is just never to do it alone, but yet to include as many people as you can in you and in your journey. And I just think there are so many people in the world that want to believe in somebody, and I also think that want to believe in somebody who loves something because they love it, not because of what it'll make them into or what they will get out of it or something like that. But like, I think there's so many people in the world that get excited about falling in love with somebody who just loves something because they love it. And so I would say focus on why you love what you are doing. I think that all too often our ego can get in the way, and we get fascinated with who we can become and what platform we can have and how big our thing can grow into. And I think you have to remember your why, and that the whole point is just you love it because you love it, not because of what you can get out of it. That's probably my advice.
I say good advice indeed. Good to focus on the things that we can actually love into, learn into every day. I appreciate that, Andrew. And last question for you today. I think I got to keep track of how many questions we've actually today. If you had to tell somebody to listen to a song today, what would you tell them to listen to?
Oh, the song one's tough for me. I actually don't listen to a ton of music. I get criticized for it. But I love the band. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They're called The Brilliance. Have you heard of them?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, and I think they have a variety of great songs. There is one called Brother, and it has the lyric that when I look into the eyes of my enemy, I see my brother. And I just think it's a great song. And I think all too often our music focuses on something vertical or something out there, or something ethereal. And I love their music is very, very practical. Like gets into the depths of what it means to be human. And I think that that's really beautiful. And so I would recommend their music. Also, the song Brother's a good one too.
Okay, I'll pick up on that one. We're slowly kind of gathering a playlist of songs to kind of deliver at the end of 2021 and say, hey, like all these people are recommending this great music, what you just shared about really digging into humanity and really digging into sort of this idea of like, hey, like we can see each other and take action for each other. No doubt a really great ad. I'm actually going to pick that up after I get off the call here. But Andrew, I have to say thanks for joining us today for a variety of reasons. But I have to say the amount of rich perspective you have, especially in the work that you do day to day, but just the way that you're delivering this and the way that you demonstrate your love for what you do, that was really evident today. So I have to say thanks for sharing that. It's really fun to be a part of the conversation, and I think we'll be working together probably a fair amount after this. So.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, yeah, it's interesting to be on this side of the podcast where I feel like I didn't get to ask you any questions. So you do a great job, and it's an honor to be on here. And thanks for asking me. It means a lot for your kind words.
Glad to have you here. I'll close out here. So for folks watching at home, that was Andrew DeVaney with As One Ministries. If you want to learn more about Andrew's work, just simply go to asoneafrica.org. Learn more about Andrew, learn more about the work. I think you'll really appreciate sort of their perspective on how they go about impacting the communities they serve. And so go to asoneafrica.org to learn more. One thing to keep in mind here as we kind of close out our work. So at the end of each Voices of Resilience, you'll hear some updates from Lost and Found, and really the biggest one right now is that Lost and Found is actually organizing an email newsletter to be able to pull together information about mental health peer support training wherever you are. And so if you want to sign up for a mental health training or learn more about how you can bring a peer support training to your workplace, you can go to bit.ly/getmhtraining. You'll be able to sign up for our newsletter. Brings together a variety of mental health peer support training resources from around the country, specifically starting right here in South Dakota. And it's a great time for us to consider, especially in an age of COVID and the age in which mental health conditions are rising faster than we sometimes know how to handle. It's good for us to be able to have the ability to talk to people about what they're experiencing and provide support. So if you're interested in that, please sign up. Go to bit.ly/getmhtraining. At the end of each week, we'll talk a little bit about sort of the new content coming. Look for a post from us here shortly on Facebook. We have 3 more guests coming up in February. Next week, we'll speak with Jackie Miskimans from Vantage Point Solutions in Mitchell about something new and powerful, kind of changing the mental health world in not just South Dakota, but around the country with the introduction of a 3-digit National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 988. We'll talk about what it means to implement that. Jackie's organization Vantage Point is really on the front line of the telecom world and kind of talking about how do we, changing wires and changing codes can really change lives. We'll also hear this month from Wendy Maber at Augustana University, chapter advisor for Augustana Lost and Found. And we'll close out the end of the month with some discussions about resilience and self-awareness. So as we close out today, I want to share a little bit of news. So the latest in sort of news or latest updates. Today, actually, in the UK, we're seeing a trend that is really kind of fascinating and might actually have some translation across the pond. What that looks like is it's a day called Time to Talk Day. So in essence, what the focus is in the UK just today is a small conversation about mental health has the power to make a big difference. If you want to learn more about what that is and this time to talk concept, simply use the link here. I'll share it also here in the comments in a moment, so you have that. But it's a really interesting thought. An entire country today decided that it was time to talk about mental health and made that a priority. And frankly, on a random Thursday. So think of that as thinking of your news this week. There's a lot of discussion happening soon, or soon to be happening in Washington, D.C. about mental health in the United States and how we fund it. And next week, we'll really be talking about one of those policy instruments, which is a new 3-digit National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So learn more today about that. And as we go, again, thanks folks for joining us today and joining us for Voices of Resilience, the place where we talk about the ways in which resilience plays out for ourselves, for others, and in our communities. And we hope you'll join us next week as we interview Jackie Miskimins and talk about how the telecom world is playing a role in suicide prevention here at home. Thanks for joining us.
We are compassionate.
We are inclusive.
We are responsive.
And we are here.